Wondering what the F has happened to your body and your life? You're in the right place, my friend. Welcome to Season 3 of Transforming 45, where we dive into the incredible stories of how brilliant humans are navigating the midlife squeeze with courage, passion, and a healthy dose of humor. Don't miss out on any of our heart-led episodes. Hit the subscribe button, leave a 5-star review, and if you're inspired, share an episode you love with a friend. It means more to me than I can express that you're choosing to spend time here and sharing our message of midlife revolution. So let's get into it. Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Transforming 45. This is going to be a super juicy conversation. So my friends, get ready. Today, I am really excited to welcome Allie Theiss. She is a board-certified sexologist, podcast host, and relationship expert for menopausal and postpartum women who view intimacy as a chore. Through her signature 3Be Me holistic framework, 3-month private journey, and custom-made flower essence blends, they revitalize their sexual desire so that intimacy is fun again. And is this ever relevant for those of us who, like I said in your intro, the people that you work with, but that perimenopausal, midlife, intimacy certainly can feel like a chore. So I am so glad you are here today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
All right. So we are going to get into all things intimacy. And to get us there, Allie, tell us, who are you and how did life introduce you to this version?
I'm just a Gen Xer trying to make it through life. You know, all the ups and downs and the curveballs that are thrown at us. I'm just happy I wake up every day, to be honest with you. Many people I went to high school with don't have that chance. So, although menopause brought me to where I am right now, I'm happy to be a part of it, because if I wasn't part of it, then I wouldn't be alive. So,
yeah. All so true and so salient and connected to all kinds of conversations that I have been having lately. And it is, we were talking a little bit before we started recording about how Gen X is that kind of in your face generation.
yes.
Which is really interesting because we're so small, right? So sometimes I wonder, population wise, we are a small sample size. So is that part of why we are so in your face? And then the other thing I wonder about is this, and for those of us who are in this midlife phase, there's a lot coming up around intergenerational trauma and how we are becoming the disruptors of that. Because I don't know about you, Allie, I'm really interested to hear, but I never thought I would be part of the sandwich generation, but I am now like the triple stacked sandwich where I'm caregiving for my grandmother, my mom's mom, my father, and then my, children. Yes, they need less from me right now, but still I am their mother. And when they need me, they need me. So it is this big squeeze, and it is interesting being the person in the center of this big stack, looking at how that intergenerational trauma is playing out from generation to generation and making decisions about how I want to shift the story and shift the narrative.
I like that, shift the story. To go back to your first question about Gen X,
Mm-hmm.
I think we're loud for 2 reasons. One, we were told to get out of the house, go about your day, don't get in trouble, I don't want the police to call, and we'll see you when it's supper time. So we were off doing things we would never tell our parents we were doing, during that time. And also, since we are the smallest, population-wise, we have to be loud for people to hear us because they're loud all around us.
Yes.
Boomers, they are a loud and very large group. And for us to get any attention at all, we have to talk over them
Uh-huh.
and louder than them. And it's not always an easy task to do, but I have found, especially when it comes to sex, the boomer generation and menopause too,
Yes.
never talked about it. Never. You know, God loved Dr. Ruth. If it wasn't for Dr. Ruth, I wouldn't know squat during high school. I'd go to the bookstore and open up her books and go, oh, that's what this is about. Oh, I don't think so. That's kind of no, we're not doing that. But there are plenty of things that I enjoy. But that said, we are more outspoken because we have had things come slamming down on us. And like menopause, what the F is this? Now, it's, I'm happy I'm in menopause. It means I'm alive. What the fuck?
Yeah. Yeah. What
You
the fuck,
know,
indeed.
what the fuck? Nobody told me about menopause. Nobody. My doctors, well, I was through it. Oh, and then I started mine in my 40s. Oh, you're too young. Nah. And well, I'm postmenopausal now, and none of the doctors helped me whatsoever. I did it on my own. So,
Yeah, and that is the reality for a lot of women, and that's what also I think is really interesting for us. And again, like tying it to that intergenerational trauma piece is that the generations before us, there was so much suppression.
yes.
And part of the reason why I feel like we are loud is because we are disruptors, right? We
Yes.
are starting to do things differently and saying, hey, so all of this was suppressed for a really long time. And it created all of these patterns that we can watch unwind. And we are not fucking doing that anymore. It's exhausting trying to pretend that everything is just fine all the time.
Yes.
And especially when it comes to things with female bodies.
All these poor bodies.
Yeah,
They go through so much.
they do. And they are a mystery, right? Like the research using female bodies at all didn't even start until 1993.
Isn't that blow your mind?
That blew my mind. I was 16 years old in 1993. So to know that I had spent 16 years on the planet and still no one had researched a female body up until that point, and that even at that point, it is still like minuscule and very like substantially underrepresented. Right.
That's why, when women are going to the doctors and say, hey, I'm having these symptoms, they're usually told, oh, it's just stress. There needs to be more research around menopause.
Yes.
For
Yeah.
sure. I mean, I would hate to see the kids. I almost sound like my mom. Those kids in their 30s. But people who are younger than us, I don't want them to go through what we did. I don't want them to hit the wall when it comes to menopause or anything else and be in the unknown.
Yes.
They need information.
Yeah, absolutely. Information is key, especially at this juncture in time. And this seems to be a bit of a theme for this season of my podcast, but that, at a time when our bodies are under attack in ways that I did not ever anticipate seeing in my lifetime, having knowledge is essential. And so not only are there layers of shame and fear around how our bodies function. So I mean there's that at the core, but then you layer on pleasure. And that just it takes the shame to a whole other level because there has been almost no aside from a few trailblazers, like you mentioned, Dr. Ruth, absolutely. I can think of like Jane Fonda also comes to mind when I think about sort of this sort of level of trailblazer and talking about how important it is for women to claim pleasure. But there are very few voices in that space. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on how that came to be and how we start moving through that.
Well, as you mentioned, Dr. Ruth and Jane Fonda, there are not that many women who are still alive of that generation. Because
True.
Dr. Ruth passed this last year, I do believe,
Hmm.
to speak of. And it's interesting we're talking about this because I have I'm learning PR in the midst of everything else, learning PR, and the mainstream magazines, mainstream outlets will not, under any circumstances, talk to me about females and pleasure. They'll talk to me about menopause. But you add pleasure, intimacy, sex in there at all, and they're like, nope, nope, can't do it.
Really?
Okay. So I've had to create a whole new website
Okay.
for menopausal women to go to that deals with menopause as a whole, as opposed to sex. It drives me insane that
Yeah.
and the boomers, for the most part, are still in charge of a lot of these big outlets.
Right.
And all these little outlets are all owned by these conglomerates now. You don't get independently owned anymore. And they're still owned by boomers. So
Hmm.
just talking about female and pleasure in the same sentence is still a taboo topic. And it is incredibly sad, because if mom's happy, the whole family's happy.
Yeah.
So if I'm getting pleasure and I'm in a good mood, then my family's going to be in a good mood. And so is my partner, my husband, whoever. I don't understand the narrow thinking.
Yeah, it's astounding to me. At this point, it shouldn't be anymore, really. Like, I feel like I should not be surprised by any of those things anymore, and yet I continue to be. But when I think about the time that we grew up, and I think I've talked about this a few times, um, it was during a time where women were being held up to the forefront, right? Like in my world, I think about Lilith Fair and the artists, the women that I was so inspired by, like all of the CDs, women in
Yeah.
music, all of that movement that was happening. And I would love to have a conversation with some of the women who were leading that charge to talk to them about their experience, because I think it would be really different from the outside. But I sometimes wonder if we were so young at the time, right? We were young, we hadn't had families, we hadn't had relationships, we weren't really in the workforce in the way that we became. And when we stepped into those roles and stepped into that world, we lost ourselves again. It's like there was this moment where we were connecting with divine feminine and
Mhm.
how that could be a leadership position in the world. And then we stepped into the patriarchal world of work, marriage, family, all the stuff. And it's now that we are hitting perimenopause and menopause, it's
Mhm.
like we are being reconnected because our bodies force us back to ourselves at this phase, and we're being reconnected to that time. And again, like that, shifting the story, like really writing this story and reclaiming that power.
Yes, it's like seeing an old friend.
Yes, it is like seeing an old friend. Yeah.
When my son was growing up, I was always known as Kyle's mom. The name Allie didn't exist. It was either Kyle's mom or John's wife. Where did I go? It's like,
Yeah.
I have a name. Hello.
Hmm.
But it wasn't used really until my son graduated high school.
Yeah.
And then I got divorced. So then I wasn't John's wife anymore. And I was still Kyle's mom, but now he's in his 20s, so I don't get called that anymore.
Hmm.
People actually learned my name, which was nice.
Yeah.
Kind of
It
strange at first, but it was nice.
Yeah, it's an essential way of reclaiming your identity. I remember that also, like for when I'd be introducing myself, I'd be like, oh, if it's a team sport and you're meeting other parents, oh, I'm Will's mom, I'm Nate's mom.
Right.
And then I was always conscious to say, and my name is Lisa. What's your name? Like, to have that, because that is not the whole aspect of my identity. That's one, being their mom is one part of who I am, but it certainly isn't the wholeness of it. And that's where I think there is so much pushback around the idea of women experiencing pleasure, because it is innately powerful.
It is. Our feminine energy is not only is it vital, it's strong. I mean, it's strong as hell. And I think that's what scares them the most.
Uh-huh.
If all the women feminine and we've got into all of our feminine energy, we all get together and banded together, no one could stop us.
Yeah.
It would be impossible. And pleasure wouldn't be such a dirty word. Connecting it to women. It would
Yeah.
be all right.
Yeah.
It's a fundamental right of being human to have pleasure in our lives. And just because we're getting older doesn't mean we shouldn't have pleasure.
Actually, we need it we need it more now, because of the benefits that it has for our bodies. So can you talk about that a little bit, like the actual physical benefits that
Well,
we get from pleasure?
sure. Well, it lowers our blood pressure. It makes us heart healthy. It lessens stress. It I call having a good sex life or good intimate life with pleasure kind of like the roto-rooter of our system. Because if you think back to when you had a good pleasure, good sex life, intimacy, whatever you want to call it, everything else just seemed to fall into place. It's like, oh yeah, all this stuff, good stuff is going on. That's why I call it the roto-rooter, because if that's working well, everything else falls into place. And we seem to, feminine energy seems to vibrate at a very high velocity and frequency. And it's much easier for us to attract things that we enjoy, things that we like. It's also easier for us to go on a wellness plan. If we want to start a new lifestyle with food or exercise. When we're in that state of mind, when we're having that pleasure, when our body's happy, we're more apt to get into that wellness and stay there. Because we're coming to it from a place of shame. We're coming to it from a place of pleasure. And
Yeah.
it just lasts long. And our creativity shoots through the roof. I find, after a good orgasm, I can write for hours, which is
Yeah.
too much information for some people, but that's just too bad.
That's what we do here.
Yes.
It's never too much information. It's the information that we didn't even know we needed.
Yes.
Right?
Very true.
Yeah, I sort of like that frame, because there's been so much that's been suppressed for so long that we don't even know the questions to ask.
No, it's interesting you say that, because one of the clinics I work for, I'm the first sex coach they've ever talked to. And they are visibly nervous. Because I asked, can I help you today? And they have no clue. They stumble over their words. They don't look at me. And I said, so I tell them a bit about myself and my insane life with my 13 cats and the dog. It's always something's going on. And they see it, they loosen up a bit, and then they're able to look me in the eye and say, okay, these are the questions I have, and able to verbalize them. But it's like they're deer in headlights.
Because, yeah, sorry. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No.
Yeah, because we've been conditioned to not talk about it.
Correct.
Right? It's funny to me that I do this work now when I look back on, for whatever reason, I didn't ever hold the same kind of shame around it that other kids my age did. And maybe it's because when I was in grade 2, I came home from school, and my mom, we talked about this later, and she was like, you came home from school with really strange ideas about what sex was from whatever was being said on the playground.
Mhm.
And she said, and I didn't want you to have those strange ideas and think that that's what sex was. And so went out and got an age appropriate kids book about sex and how it worked. And so she read that book to me, and or no, she didn't read it to me. She gave it to me. She gave it to me to read.
There you go.
Yeah. And I do remember being like eyes wide open, like, whoa, this is what happens. This seems terrifying to me.
Yes.
And we didn't really have follow-up conversation about it.
Mhm.
She knew that she wanted me to know what was real, but I think still didn't know how to really like talk to me about it. So I had the information. It seemed scary, but it also sort of took away the air of mystery. And I remember being in grade 7, and there was a 17 magazine that had made its way into our classroom. And in it was like the nuts and bolts facts about sex.
Mhm.
And I remember reading it, and I was reading it out loud to a friend, and they were like, "You're reading that out loud?" And I was like, "Well, yeah, like it's biology.
Yeah.
So there's nothing, it's like, they're like, will you read it out loud to anyone who wants to hear it? I was like, sure. So I remember it being an indoor recess, and like there a circle gathered around me, and I'm reading out loud from 17 magazine the nuts and bolts of like how to have intercourse, essentially. And and I was like, yeah, I clearly had a different perspective because I wasn't feeling shame about reading it out loud. I just was like, look, this is the deal. And doing it now, again, it's kind of like you were saying about meeting an old friend. I feel like I am sort of meeting that girl again and talking about it, but in very different and in very nuanced ways after a lived experience in reality that went beyond the nuts and bolts.
Yes, I grew up Catholic, so we never talked about sex because, well, you just weren't supposed to be doing it. And my church was kind of a progressive church in the fact that you could sit face to face with the priest and talk about your sins for the week or whatever. And anytime Father Warble would see me coming into his office, he'd just shake his head because he knew something outlandish was about to exit my mouth. And he would just, and I remember going in and asking him, okay, Mom and Dad say we can't have sex. I understand how it works. He's like, oh, you do you? And I'm like, yeah, read my Dr. Ruth books. I know what's going on. And I find it so hard to believe that if I have sex with somebody and I'm not married to him, that I'm doomed to hell. Or if I pleasure myself, I'm going to spend the rest of my existence in hell. That doesn't sound right. You used to tell me that God's all loving and forgiving and this wonderful being, and I'm going to be condemned by doing something human. And I've never seen a priest change the subject so fast.
Yeah, I bet.
He said, well, this is something you need to talk to your parents about. It goes nowhere. I remember telling him, oh, just look at Dr. Ruth again.
Thanks, but no thanks. Yeah,
I'll take my chances in hell, and I'll do a couple Hail Marys and an Oh Father and go on my way. Yeah,
but of course, I can only imagine how quickly he would want to change the subject, because that is the essential question, right? When we're looking at the intersection, particularly of religion and the role that religion has played in the shaming and suppression of sex, I laugh now because it's so absurd,
it is.
right? Like, the sex is how we are here. It is how we continue the species. And for, a species, that's its main goal, right? Its biological imperative is to increase its population, replace and increase its population. And yet we have this institution that has come in to say, yes, that's what we want you to do. We want you to continue to propagate and replace the population, but we're going to wrap it all in shame and no one's going to talk about it.
Yeah. I mean, as I was growing up, on TV, they still had the husband and wife sleeping in separate beds. They were sleeping in separate beds, and all babies came by the stork. This bird would drop off a baby. It was in the cartoons, and it was in the sitcoms. You know, I love Lucy. I remember when she was actually pregnant. Well,
yeah.
she wasn't actually pregnant, but in the show she was. And I just remember what a big group. I remember my grandparents sitting around with my parents, and they're all talking about it. Oh my God, I can't believe that's on TV. You know, how'd that baby get there? They sleep in separate beds. You know, it's just,
Immaculate conception.
it amazed me that through this, I was born in 67, so through the rest of the 60s and at least half the 70s, the stork is what dropped off babies.
Yeah, I remember that very early on. So I'm 10 years younger than you are. So my viewing context was in that time when it was really starting to shift and change a lot. So I think I remember a cartoon or two where there was a stork dropping off the baby. But then you were seeing pregnancy on TV a little bit more. There was a lot in the late 80s, early 90s
Oh,
around teen pregnancy as well,
mhm.
which has been a double-edged sword, I think, for us in our generation, because yes, it was telling the story and bringing it forward that this happens, but it still was in such a shameful way. And it was always, the story was always the woman,
Yes.
right? It was her burden to bear. It was her shame. Like in all of those storylines, when I think about them, it was either the woman being portrayed in a manipulative way of getting pregnant to manipulate someone into doing something,
Correct.
or having an abortion and the shame that came along with that.
Mhm.
And so I think also has played a role in how we have formed our understanding of sex, because it still was coming to us in a very fear-based way. It was
Oh,
like,
yeah.
yeah, if you do this, if you engage in sexual behavior, this is what could happen to you.
The after school specials. We have ABC
Yeah.
after school special would show that in the dynamic. Yeah, it was all the girls' fault. I remember also growing up, there were houses for unwed mothers. If you were pregnant and not married, they would send you off to this house. And you would give birth, they'd take the baby away for adoption, and then you come back, you were just visiting your aunt or something like that, in a different state for a while. It just, and I remember thinking that's just not right.
Yeah. No, it isn't. It is not right.
Mhm.
And so there's all of this underlying, this current, right? That's underlying and needs to be unwound so that we can look at it all and say, yeah, these are all the things that happened that led us to where we are now. But
Correct.
we also, I think, are in a self-aware enough place. If you've had the opportunity to be able to do some reflection and really learn about trauma, about how our brains and bodies process it, how our bodies hold on to all of the trauma that we haven't processed and haven't experienced. So the majority of women at this point in their lives have an entire lifetime story of sexual trauma.
Oh, yes. And it's interesting because on my mom's side of the family, there's sexual trauma going back generations that nobody talked about. And my mom was one of the only ones left from the side of the family. And she knows the story. She will not tell us the story
Uh-huh.
of what happened. It's just, she carries it, and, she passes it on to me and my two sisters, unknowingly they unknowingly pass it down, but they still do pass it down.
Yes.
It gets trapped, and for some reason, women, I don't know why we do this, but we do. We hold on to everything. We hold on
Uh-huh.
to all the emotions, good or bad. We put them in our heart and we stick them in and we shove them down in case we ever need it again.
Uh-huh.
We don't know. But it gets so stuffed full of stuff we're carrying for other people that it's so difficult for us to experience something on our own because we're out of room.
Yes. Yeah. And I also wonder how much of that is absolutely or we are out of room. I totally agree. And how much of it is protection. Because we now have this like lifetime of sexual trauma. And when I say that, I mean it in lots of different contexts, right? Like even it just violence towards our bodies or violence that we have witnessed toward women's bodies. We can't, you can't observe someone having a sexually or a sexually traumatic experience or any form of of violence to our bodies without being impacted by it and knowing, right, that was the whole impetus behind Me Too, right? That all of us have a story or have been impacted. Like even when I think about my birth story with my oldest, I was induced and then I had an emergency C-section, and I am so deeply grateful for the fact that I also had a midwife who was with me,
Oh,
because so she was at my head with me, and I'd had high blood pressure, so like I did also have a doctor involved with my case. But he did the delivery with a medical student,
mhm.
and I heard him, like, Will had been delivered, and I just heard him saying, okay, ready, 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 fire. And then I'd hear this bang. And this is one of the multitude of reasons why I'm grateful for my midwife. But I would turn to her and I said, what is happening?
Yeah.
She was like, okay, Lisa, there's a student here. The doctor is teaching him how to do staples. So it makes me emotional thinking about it, even to this day. She's like, so what he's doing is walking him through it. I'm so sorry you're having this experience, but you're going to hear him line up the staple, tell the student when to do it, and then you're going to hear the bang of the stapler for your entire incision. And so there's like, we don't necessarily think of that as violence, but my body sure as hell has held on to that as violence to my body, that I wasn't seen as a human being having an experience, because neither of them came to me and asked permission if this was okay. Let me know what was going to happen and what I could expect. None of that. Just, okay, yep, ready, ready, fire, bang, over and over and over again.
Wow.
And I know that I am not the only woman who has I'm certainly not the only woman who's had that experience, right? There is birth trauma for the majority of women who have had it in a medicalized system.
Yes.
So when we think about sexual trauma, it is encompassing of all of those things. And so now we come to a point in our lives where we've had all of these experiences, and not to negate that we've also had beautiful ones, because there have also been really beautiful,
Yes.
like intimate moments as well along the journey. But we get to this point where suddenly our body is reacting and functioning differently. And in my experience and what I've studied is it brings to the surface all of the stuff, right? All of the hard stuff that's happened. So how do you walk women through that process and help to get them reconnected to the good stuff again?
It's not easy.
Yeah.
Because
No.
first they have to want to deal with this. Sure, it can come up and they can try to shove it back down again, but it's just going to keep coming back up again. Once things start to bubble and rise to the surface, if you don't deal with it, it's going to keep just showing up. I like to have women either journal or if they want to record it, on their phone, something that gets it out of their system. I want them to basically, I call it vomit writing, where they just, everything that's in their head about that certain experience, they just write. And if they write it down, they have a choice. They can rip, when they're done writing all about it, they can rip what's out of their journal and burn it. to let it float away into the ethers, or they can keep it there as a reminder that I've lived through this and I'm okay. I'm still there. So we work with what bubbles up, first of all. And we do it with her writing and us talking about it. And I will go as far as she's comfortable. I never push anybody to do anything. And once I can always see an aha moment where the light comes on. And when I see that moment, that's when she's ready to finally let that whole experience go and hold on to it inside anymore. When she has done with that, when she has finished that little part, then we step back, we step into pleasure. Because it doesn't do any good to step into pleasure if you're still carrying this. The pleasure can't knock it out. So knock it out first. That's why my She Be Me framework is so important, because women were multiple layered. There's so many different layers of us that we need to get through in order to have a satisfying, intimate sex life, to have pleasure and enjoy it.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And I hadn't thought about it that way. The importance of dealing with the trauma so that pleasure can just be pleasure without being wrapped up in all of the other experiences, all of the other emotions, because that's what happens, right? Even if you are really wanting to engage, like you want to have this experience, but there's still trying to think of a word to explain like how it feels for me. Like it feels like there's this weight on my chest that just won't let me fully get into my body. And it takes a long time for me to be able to get out from underneath that weight.
Yeah.
And it requires a lot of patience from my partner, which thankfully we have that kind of relationship and that patience exists. But that's not the case. That is not the case for everyone. And so that's a really important approach to take around letting yourself process all of the hard stuff so that you can get to what actually feels good.
What actually feels good, yes. And the flower essences that I create on combinations, she'll take certain combinations to help her bring up the trauma and work through it. And then we switch to the fun part, where she has a different combination for the pleasure, to allowing it to come through and enjoy herself.
Yeah. So that's like the emotional, spiritual level, which is foundational and really needs to be there. And then what advice do you give to women around the physicality of it, right? Because there's the emotional part, but then there also is the truth that our body is working differently with the fluctuations of estrogen and progesterone. We're not creating the same kind of lubrication that we did before. Vaginal dryness and painful sex is for real. And if you are experiencing that, that can also compound the emotional part of it, right? So what do you recommend for women to start to also treat and work with the physical aspects of it?
Well, first, I think every female should talk to their doctor about hormones, first of all. There are so many studies out there that hormones are bad, that hormones are good. It's enough to make me want to put my head through the wall. I chose not to use any hormones because my family has a long history of ovarian cancer. It's killed everybody on my mom's side, and blood clots. So I just made a choice for myself. But for a lot of women, getting the hormone replacement therapy, HRT, or bio hormone replacement therapy helps tremendously with the dryness and the painful sex. Unfortunately, with our hormones gone, we can't juice up. There's nothing there. There's nothing there. And if you do decide not to go the hormonal route, I always tell people they should first start with vaginal moisturizers, which you can get over the counter. Every other day, nice little suppository, up and at them, and it takes away some of the Sierra Desert feel that will run in there. And then when it comes to actual intercourse, lubricant. lubricant on yourself. I would say on yourself in the opening, because that makes women feel not as pleasy, right?
Yeah.
These be more scientific, but it would make them, you know, it would make them feel uneasy. So I say your opening, and
Right.
then all over the penis or the sex toy, whatever's going in. And everybody has to be lubed up. There's no such thing as too little. And you have to prepare. We're not in our 20s. We cannot jump in the back seat and have a really good time.
Uh-huh.
But we still can kind of maybe move in the back seat. There's no more jumping anywhere. And still have fun with preparation. So those two items help with vaginal dryness, staying hydrated. You always hear, make sure you drink enough water. Well, not only is your vagina going to go dry, so's your surface, your skin, everything goes dry. So drink as much water as you can handle in a day. It's hopefully by a toilet. So you come right back out again. And we want you to be in the rush hour traffic and have to go to the bathroom. But those will help you deal with painful sex. Our vaginas also shrink during menopause.
Yeah.
And sometimes they shrink too much. And there are vaginal dilators that you can use to open it up again. And also the nerve endings in our vagina also start to deaden. So the girth that might have been okay when you were younger, you need more of it now in order to feel something. And that's not a rip on who you're with. It's just in order to feel it, you need more in there.
Right.
If that makes sense, without being too overly graphic.
And so that speaks to a couple of things. So one, it is, again, going back to the importance of pleasure, because the more pleasure we have, the healthier our tissue is and stays, right? So that's one of the things that I think is really important for women to know, is that this is not your lot in life. Like yes, this is a symptom you are having. So let it be a message from your body saying, hey, we need something different.
Yes.
Or we need something more, but don't take it as this is just how it is now, because that's not the case. There is a lot that you can do to improve your quality of life. And a lot of it has to do with taking care of our sexual organs. And yet it is never, ever spoken about. So talking about vaginal moisturizer is key, because the healthier that tissue is, not only is it good for intimacy and our sex life, but it's also just really good for our organs, which means that we will have less of a chance of incontinence. That means that there is more muscle support and tissue and fiber support for holding our organs in place. Like, it's a big deal. It's literally the core of our foundation of our body and how we move forward with a really good quality of life.
And I like that you brought up organs, because real fast, our brain is our largest sex organ. And a lot of women, whether they're on hormones or not, lose their libido, lose even that desire to have pleasure. And if they're with a partner, it can throw a wrench into the works, so to speak. I have found that if you want to restart your libido and the hormones are not helping, or you're not taking them, for you either to read or listen to romance novels. The kind of saucy stuff that we used to read when we were younger with Fabio and his
yeah.
Before I became the I believe it's not butter guy. I don't want to say what. But when our hormones leave us, our brain knows that we're not having any more children. And it's built into our body. If we're not going to have any more children, why should women have sex? Thank you, dear brain. So put sex and romance back on the brain again. Yeah. And watching a show just isn't good enough. You need to be able to use your imagination. Women have fantastic imaginations. We need to bend to that. And your brain doesn't know whether what you're doing, is it real, or are you imagining something? There's nothing in it that tells it the difference.
Yes.
So if you're being whisked off by some hot knight, it's got no idea if you're transported back into the 1600s. Um, it just knows that this is something that's important to you because it keeps showing up. So your brain then puts sex and romance back on the brain. When you think about it more often, your libido rises, your partner's happy. And it can be the real saucy kind of books, or it can be the wholesome. It's just putting it back up there. That's what you need.
Yeah, and really finding what works for you. And I really love that you brought up imagination and playfulness, because that's the other thing that's important to bring back is to remember that this is playful and it can be fun,
Mhm.
and imagination absolutely becomes a really important part of that, as does communication.
Oh, God, yes.
Yeah. So how do you support women to talk to their partners about what they're experiencing? Because this is truly a real partnership, right?
It is. And I'm glad you brought that up because I designed a deck of cards for to help women talk to their partners about what's going on and to help the partners talk to them. The ego gets involved. Ego gets in there and it's very easy for someone's feelings to get hurt. So, especially if you're in the midst of pleasure, we're just going to throw this out here real fast. If you're in the midst of pleasure with your partner, if something is going wrong, if something you used to like, you don't really like anymore, you can kind of shift your body and kind of direct them in a different area, but don't yell at them and don't say how much, no, how much you can't stand it, because that'll immediately go to their brain and everything will just stop.
Uh-huh.
Those important conversations about what works and what doesn't either happens before you jump in bed or after you're in bed, not during. I just wanted to throw that out because how many times have it? Yeah, I made that mistake many years ago. Um, but I developed cards for bring conversation between partners and also to bring playfulness into the bedroom again. I have role playing cards. I've got touching each other cards. Different things that if you're too embarrassed or not comfortable enough to say something, you can always draw a card and hand it to them.
Yeah.
Can we talk about this?
Yeah. That's a really great strategy. And for listeners, I'll make sure all of those things are linked in the show notes, because those are really good resources, because it can be, even if you've been with your partner for decades, we still often haven't had really honest conversations about how our bodies worked and how
Yeah.
they're working now. And I think what you said about making sure you have those conversations before and after, it's always so much better to be able to have those conversations when everybody is in an emotionally safe place.
Yes.
So, I can speak to having that conversation with my partner and just saying, I want you to know, like, at a time where, nothing is happening, we're just having dinner or whatever the context is. My
Right.
body just isn't working the same way as it used to. I want you to know it's not you. It's
Yes.
something I am just starting to figure out. It feels weird and uncomfortable for me. So I'm sure it feels weird and uncomfortable for you. And this is something we're going to have to figure out together.
That's true. If women, as we can't figure out menopause, if we slammed into that wall, just think of the partners in our life. If we
Uh-huh.
slammed into it, they got no clue. They're
No.
like the clueless of clueless, and it's not their fault. They weren't brought up on it either. Well,
Yeah. Absolutely.
you
Actually,
know,
part of me lately has been feeling called to speak to men about menopause almost more than I'm feeling called at this point to speak to women, because we need someone to advocate for us and be there for us. And someone needs to do the education for men as
yes,
well.
yes.
It's really, really important. We can't do this alone.
If you want help with that, let me know.
Okay.
Because I talk to with the clinic I work with, I talk to a lot of men, and they are absolutely clueless. They're like, I
Yeah.
had no idea. I said, well, neither of you did.
Mhm.
And A lot of women I talk to, they tell their partner what's going on. The partner doesn't believe them. Oh, it's an excuse for you not to have sex. And that's when I tell them, let me talk to them. Just have a nice, normal conversation. And I educate them on it. They're like, oh, that makes sense.
Yes. And sometimes it just is easier to hear from someone other than your partner because there's not all of the like blame, shame, emotional years of like relationship stuff coming with it. It's just like these are the facts as to what is happening in a woman's body at this point in time.
Yes,
Right?
exactly.
And for women who are experiencing menopause and perimenopause and trying to explain it to someone, when you're experiencing brain fog and word recall issues and emotional turmoil, the very last thing you want to do is now explain it to someone else. Right.
Correct. And I still get the brain fog and miss words quite a bit. And it's, I'm trying to talk to somebody about their menopause and the word I was just about to say gone. And I tell them, I say, sorry, brain fog. They'll come back.
I know word recall, honestly, right now is my biggest, like my partner is getting really good at mime because I'll be like, the thing, the sink, and he's like, you mean a faucet? Yes. Faucet. Thank you. Yeah, that was a literal thing that happened in our world last week. But having that knowledge, because he knows, like, I am having word recall issues.
Yeah.
That this is something that's going to happen because for him, it also lights up a little bit of fear to see me, who's always like, had a good vocabulary. I've had access to all of the words that I need. And suddenly I don't. And that can light up fear in our partners as well to wonder, like, is my wife or partner starting to experience early stages of dementia? What is happening? I don't understand what's happening with her brain and that can be scary. And I think we also have to remember that component of it, that there is an underlying fear of getting older and what that means for all of us in a relationship.
Oh, definitely. No, nobody wants to lose their memory. Nobody wants brain fog. And then my brain fog on top of postmenopausal, I've had COVID. So I've had long-term COVID as well, which helps make my brain fog even worse.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is interesting because since I'm back in school for my PhD, I'm trying to keep the brain going.
Yes.
Not the easiest of things to do, but it's important everyone tries to keep the brain moving forward, do puzzles, learn something new, whatever it may be, for new pathways.
Yes. And to continue having pleasure.
Oh, most certainly.
Allie, thank you so much for being here today. I think I'm glad that we were able to get to all elements of our identity through this, the heart, the mind, the body, the soul. All of it is connected in this conversation about women and pleasure and how it has impacts on our relationships, on our long-term health, on our in the moment. But it really is an essential conversation. And thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been a wonderful conversation. I love talking about women and sex.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. Anytime. Thank you for being part of the Transforming 45 community. Your support means the world to us. Stay tuned for more juicy episodes and remember to keep showing up to your life with the love and magic you deserve. Until next time.